Thank you for joining us for this virtual museum midday panel discussion with Ketchikan Daily News photojournalists. Photographs tell stories and create a visual record of our community, contributing further layers of meaning to our collective history. Ketchikan has been fortunate to have some extraordinary photojournalists documenting our everyday goings-on, which benefits us as well as future generations. We want to start our museum midday by recognizing that the Tongass Historical Museum and Totem Heritage Center are located on the traditional lands of the Tontiquan and Sanyaquan people of the Tlingit First Nations. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and learn here in mutual respect and appreciation. We do want to thank you guys for joining us. Whenever we're putting together museum middays, it's really looking and seeing, well, for me primarily, it's like, what am I curious about and who do I want to talk with? And so all y'all have definitely come up, your names have come up, all these really great photos from the Ketchikan Daily News that really tell these stories of our community and Ketchikan's past. And we rely so heavily on them that I'm thrilled that we're able to get you guys for this museum midday to talk a little bit about who you are and your process and kind of how you see yourselves in that long line of photographers in general, but specifically photojournalists here in Ketchikan. So if we can go ahead and get you all to start with your introductions. Hall, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you came to be taking photos here in Ketchikan?
Hall Anderson. I was a daily news photographer for 30 years. I started in 1984 full-time and retired in 2014. So that's 30 years almost exactly. But yeah, I came up from Oregon, and my first visit in Ketchikan was in 1977, June. I visited friends that I went to college with, and they all moved up here around 1974, 75, got jobs at the pulp mill or the Alaska Ferries. And so I spent 2 weeks, got to see the loggers rodeo, and it was sunny weather the whole time mostly. And at the loggers rodeo, I was at the baseball field, Walker Field, and I was pretty impressed that you could drink beer at the loggers rodeo. And it was hot and sunny. It was a pretty fun event. And I took my first photos of an event then. And I took a few photos around town. But anyway, my friends kept getting me to come back up. I lived in Eugene, Oregon, where I went to college. And I came up in 79, and I did a 1-month workshop on Baranof Island in Port Alexander, which is on the southern tip of Baranof Island. It's a little fishing community that was a trolling community that was actually established in 1913. It's kind of like port protection. If you watched that National Geographic show on TV, 5 Degrees Below Zero or whatever, it's the same kind of a place, very end of the island, very scenic, and I loved it. I set up the darkroom and taught photography, and I did this for Southeast Island School District. Well, that was 1979. In 1980, they did the same thing in Coffin Cove, Alaska, and Prince of Wales Island. I set up the darkroom there and taught the community and kids how to use the darkroom. That was a 5-week residency. And so I started making imprint in Southeast Alaska, and I came back at 82, I think, in 83. And 83, I worked at Silver Lining Seafoods. And that's the time that I met Ray Troll, became a good friend. He actually has a master's in photography and drawing in college, and we talked about that a lot. And Dave Rubin came up then too. So I started getting my foot in the door, meeting people, and I had a few friends from, like I said, college that were living here. And by 86, all those friends that got me here had moved away from Ketchikan. But in 1983, I walked in the door of the Ketchikan Daily News in July and asked the editor, whose name was Duncan Fraser at the time, I said, hey, do you take freelance photography? And he said, well, we do, but it just so happens we're going to be in between photographers in a couple of days. Our photographer is leaving, and the new guy won't be out for 7 days from Marquette, Michigan. And Duncan was from Marquette, Michigan too. And the exiting photographer was from Marquette, Michigan. So there's that connection with those guys. So I filled in the second week of July, 83 for 7 days in between photographers. Well, Heidi Ekstrand was a reporter then who became an editor next summer. And she remembered me and she said, well, hey, Hall, can you come up in August 84 and fill in for a month while our current photographer, Bob Hallinan, who turned out to be a great photographer in Anchorage, was going on a 1-month vacation. And I said, sure. And I heard rumors he was leaving, and 6 weeks later, he and his wife moved to Anchorage, worked the Anchorage Times, and I started in November 84 full-time. And that's kind of how my career got off the ground.
Fantastic.
Kind of sort of good timing.
It seems like a confluence of a lot of things coming together for you there.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and we can ask Taylor the same question. Taylor, if you can do us the pleasure of introducing yourself and kind of giving us the highlights of how you came to be taking photos here in Ketchikan.
Sure. Taylor Balkom. I'm originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I grew up there. I went to college at LSU, and while I was in college, I got on at the Daily Reveille, my student newspaper, first as a reporter, and then, kind of just fell in love with photography. I worked at Best Buy, and I had to learn like the exposure triangle, shutter speed, ISO, aperture, and I was like, I kind of like this photography thing. I bought a camera, and then I decided I didn't really want to write as my main thing anymore. And so I switched to photography at the paper and did that all the way up through graduation in 2014. That whole year, I was applying for every photo job that I saw. Didn't hear back from anybody except for the Ketchikan Daily News, who called me up, flew me out, and I interviewed with them in, I want to say late June of 2014. And then they kind of let me take my sweet time getting up there. Took a month. And then in August of 2014, I finally got to town with all my stuff after driving across the country, hopping on a ferry in Canada, across the continent actually. And got in August, and I was at the Daily News for a little over 3 years. I left in October 2017, but I've been back several times. I had a month stint in 2018 where I was back at the paper, and I took a couple photos and wrote a couple stories, filled in for Dustin for a football game. And yeah.
So my name is Dustin Sofranek. I've been a photojournalist for about 15 years, I guess professionally, and then I was at a school newspaper for about 5 years before that. I've had a few internships throughout the United States, one in Idaho and one in Wisconsin, and I've had a few staff jobs, throughout the United States, one in Wisconsin and one in New York, northern New York, not New York City. It's a big difference, and and then, I came here because I was really interested in Alaska a lot, throughout the past few years, before moving up here. And I saw this position advertised several times throughout my career down south. And I've always took interest in it. And I think I may have even applied for it at one time. But when it came up again, I was in Texas, working for the, being a freelancer for the Austin Statesman. And when that job came up, I just immediately applied for it. It took a little convincing for my wife when, it was finally offered to me, saying this is an opportunity for us. And, she was just graduating with her teaching degree, but we were ready to make a different move in our life. And it just, lined up, synchronized exactly how we wanted it. And after I visited up here, it just made sense after I met with Tina Williams, the publisher, to take the job. And, if she was going to offer it to me, and I was really hoping after I interviewed with her that she would. And a few days later, she called me and asked me if I wanted to take the job, and I said yes immediately. So I'm here at Wolf Point tuning in, but I thought this was a good opportunity because then you get to see, basically us photojournalists have like a mobile office, and this one's mine. It's my vehicle, and all of us use our vehicle, and which is a good point with photojournalism. We have this. Basically, we have this territory we're responsible for covering, And, you know, usually at my other jobs, it's been like, you know, 200 miles where you can drive in each direction. But here we're on an island, so it's a little different, but you still need a vehicle to get, you know, from point A to point B, you know, in a timely manner. And so this one's mine, you know, I keep my camera close to me right there. And, you know, you get to see the kind of like what gear I'm using. So I use like a 300 and, you know, a couple other lenses, but that, you know, it took me a while to get this gear. So it's been, you know, a big difference of having good gear to, you know, what I came here with.
Fantastic. No, it's always interesting to see, you know, how folks come to be taking, you know, into their vocation, whether it's, you know, photojournalism or taking photos in general, and kind of how that meshes. So that's very interesting, very cool. So both of you, you know, came from outside of Ketchikan, and you've both worked in other newsrooms, or, you know, currently working, Taylor, down in Oregon. Is that correct?
Yes,
Washington, Oregon. All right.
Yeah.
How is being a photojournalist here in Ketchikan different from other places? So I'll let either of you all can take this one, and feel free to chime in.
Go ahead.
Well, at least for me, you know, my college newspaper was actually pretty big. You know, we had like a staff of like 100 people, which is insane. And coming to Ketchikan, you know, where the newsroom size was 6, a pretty rapid change. You know, we at the Reveille, we had, you know, of course we were all college kids too, so we were all loud, obnoxious, but, you know, the Daily News's newsroom was very, you know, very quiet compared to that, and that was definitely something I had to get used to. And also, you know, being from the South, you know, I'm used to hot weather, used to humidity, used to taking photos of football, a lot of people caring about football. You know, football's not as big in Ketchikan as it is in the South. So getting used to that was took a little adjustment. I did not care about basketball until I came to Ketchikan.
I think that's true of a lot of folks.
Yes.
Well, you know, like basketball is very much key here, I've learned. It might be football down in Texas in the lower 48, but it's definitely basketball here in Ketchikan.
Yeah. It was also, you know, the other thing that was an adjustment was being the only photographer. You know, at the Reveille, there we had a staff of like, you know, 7 or 8 photographers that would take photos, and in Ketchikan it was me, and, you know, Hall would fill in occasionally, or, you know, our news reporter Nick would fill in occasionally. But other than that, it was like you're the only person responsible for all of the local photos that go into the paper, and it's kind of overwhelming when, like, you know, you're used to like competing with other photographers for front page art space, but not in Ketchikan. It's up to you.
That's pretty much the case, yeah.
Ketchikan, we're a one-man show for photography. You know, Hall fills in once in a while, which is awesome, and he's a much better photographer than me. So it's always good to see his view on everything. It kind of gives me a refresh. But that's the big difference is, you know, part of just one person. Everything is my responsible to find, you know, assignments, as well as kind of work out the logistics of assignments. And, you know, down south, when I worked for newspapers, I've always worked under a chief photographer, and they kind of take care of all that logistics for you and just call you and be like, hey, you got to be here at a certain time. So up here in Ketchikan, that's different. And oh wow, I'm sure it's different. You know, a lot more challenging to organize things up here, just considered with weather and all that. We have, I guess we kind of get nailed with the elements a little more than down south, and so I think the elements always are a big challenge, and you know, making my day different than what it would be down south.
For sure. I mean, just even the values of light and dark are a lot different with all of our cloud cover all the time.
Well, I didn't have previous newsroom experience. I did apply to the Eugene Weekly in Eugene, Oregon, and that was definitely a bigger staff than the Ketchikan Daily News had. And 75 people applied for the opening photo position. And I actually did my first, I had to do 3 assignments. I'd never done assignments before because my background was fine art photography at the University of Oregon, which I did for 5 years or so or whatever. And, you know, I met Ansel Adams, and I met Brett Weston, the son of Edward Weston, famous landscape photographer, and got to see their houses and stuff. so that was my background. So I did 3 assignments and made it to the top 3 for the Eugene Weekly, and that was it. I didn't get it, and so my friends kept saying, "Come up to Ketchikan," and that's when I decided to walk in the door at the Ketchikan Daily News in summer 1983 and just ask them about freelance. And the rest is history. I got the job, and I did do an internship, 7-day internship at Anchorage Daily News in 1990. I met Richard Murphy, the photo editor, at what's called a flying short course. That's where newspaper photographers get together, and you have like the leaders in your field or the top dog photographers in the region come, and they do workshops and review your portfolio. Well, Richard Murphy had seen a lot of my photos over the AP wire, and he kind of liked my vision. And so he invited me up, if you want to come up and do a 7-day workshop. We can't pay anything, but you can hang out with the staff and do assignments. So I did that for a week, stayed with one of the photographers, and did like 2 assignments a day. And there were 6 photographers and 2 photo editors. So it was fun for me because it was working with a newsroom. And the thing about the Ketchikan Daily is, as a photographer, you really don't get any feedback, because there are a lot of photographers or people take pictures in Ketchikan, especially now, but they're not newspaper oriented. They're not in the photojournalism. They're in the scenics and other stuff. And it's a whole different ball of wax doing that kind of stuff. So, I would get feedback from the professionals in the state of Alaska that were newspaper photographers. We all kind of knew each other after a few years, but that was about it. And so I always wanted to work at a paper like the Anchorage Daily News because I liked the competition, the camaraderie of working with the staff that's in photography, but it never happened. And, things worked out for the best for me. So that was kind of my story. But like I said, we started out with 11 people in the newsroom, and ended up, like Taylor said, that he had 6 when he's in the newsroom.
Wow. Well, that kind of segues beautifully here. I'm glad we're asking both of you guys this question first before we ask Dustin, because he's currently taking photos actively as a staff photographer for the Ketchikan Daily News. But I know, Taylor, you're now down in Oregon. Hall, you say you've retired, but I've seen some wonderful photos lately in the paper from you too. Can you talk a little bit about some of the favorite photos or stories you covered in your time with the Ketchikan Daily News? Well, whether it was the story that was interesting or the photo or...
Yeah, the favorite thing is always tough for someone, an artist type, I guess. I don't really necessarily have favorites. My recent favorite is the whale shot. I'm looking for it and I can't find it, with the kayaker. And that was when I did a 2-week stint when Dustin was off because his wife had the baby. Real graphic, simple design. I've photographed whales for years, and everybody in town has gotten better whale shots than me by far. And this is the first one I really liked. And I like getting that shot. But certain stories, I have done, one of your questions was photo essays that never got published. I've done 3 photo essays, never got published. And my first one was a self-starter, like 1983. I did Mud Bite, the float house community, which no longer exists out by Totem Bite State Park. There are all these float houses and people living in them. So I got to know the folks and photographed them and kind of their lifestyle in the camp. Now, I hadn't done any photo essays before, hadn't worked at a paper. So it was kind of a cold turkey thing. I kind of try to figure it out. And I always looked at the Anchorage Daily News because one of my roommates, people I stayed with at the time, I think they had a subscription or something. But the photography was always excellent in that paper. And so that was kind of my role model. And then I did another story with that the writer June Allen, who wrote for the Ketchikan Daily News and Sit News. She's an older woman. She was a professional writer, been here on and off since the 50s and 60s, lived around the state, a very good writer. She did a story that I did on Highway 1, which is the highway that runs through Ketchikan. From the north end to the south end, it has like 8 different names, I think. So I did a photo essay on that and never got around to getting it published. and shot it in color. And the other one I did in color was of a local gal, Karen Pitcher, who's well known here, and her husband Dave, who's deceased, and her son Sam, who's deceased. I photographed that family on their trolling boat, and did a photo essay on them, and did kind of a essay on the trollers. That was in the early 1990s. And I think we have run a couple of those images in the paper, but the essay was never run. I never did a text, but with the June Allen thing, I still have a text for that, but it's in color and it's all color slides, and it was kind of a personal project. But there's a lot of photos over the years that I guess I've liked, but I don't know if I necessarily have a favorite. My selects are in course of my book. A lot of those. It's hard to pick a favorite out of the ones that are in my book. Still Raining, Still Dreaming, though. So,
Yeah, I read some wonderful. I've only seen a couple of the photos from that book, but in preparing and talking to you guys, and seeing what you all were about, some of the quotes that really stood out as far as the reviews from the book were that you all, specifically Hall, but I can see it reflected again in your work, Taylor, that your work is very much a reflection of community. It might be for the photo, and it is photojournalist, it has that angle of telling that story, in a professional capacity, but it very much looks at some of those facets of small town life. Do you kind of see that standing out a little bit, Hall? Is that too much of a generalization?
well, yeah, that's really what it's about in a small town. I think that's your job, is to document the community you live in, and and that was really it became rewarding for me. It was pretty challenging at first because I never shot sports, and like we're talking about basketball. Basketball is huge in Alaska because the weather's bad, and it's an indoor sport. And even the little native communities up north, everybody plays basketball in the state, boys and girls. And it's become kind of my favorite sport to photograph over the years. But yeah, community events, and you can find the most mundane things in the world. You can find great images there. It's just how you approach it. So
Yeah, that comes to mind as Dustin's series about pigeons. So we've been following those too. He's been following, but Taylor, you had something to add there.
Oh, I was just going to say, that we were asked, or I was asked to get a lot of like just standalone, feature photos in my time at the paper. And so those were all, if they weren't a scenic, they were just like, small snapshots of things happening in town. And I remember I got this shot. I don't know if it was a tourist or a local, but it was a guy taking a nap outside of Safeway on the water side, under like just perfectly framed under the big Safeway S, just with one arm over his eyes, just snoozing away. And that's one of the favorite photos that I took in my time there, besides my Aurora stuff, which people seem to like.
Yes. We'll definitely link through your bio, but I love all the Aurora Borealis photos that you have within your portfolio and your website. So I'm definitely a fan of those. Lots of colorful imagery there. Yes. Were there any specific stories that really stood out for you that you were able to cover in your time here, Taylor, for those 3 years?
Yeah, in 2016, me and Hall and Nick went to Kasan to cover the Clan House restoration over there, and that was an all-day event.
That was great.
Yeah, that was just a fantastic time. I got a ton of photos out of that. Nick wrote a great story. Hall got some great shots. It was I'd never been in anything like that, and that was something I'll absolutely never forget. Other than that, I mean.
Well, I appreciate those photos, the ones of Stormy Hamer and everyone there. We'll make certain to share those and see if we can't put them on the screen real quick here. But yeah, those are standout images and stories that have been told.
My favorite thing was when I went over to Metlakatla area for culture camp, and I hung out with the culture camp for the day and documented it and wrote the story, as well as did a photo story for it. But that was my, most interesting and probably my favorite thing to do, and something that I want to go back there to. It'd be preferable if I could go over to Metlakatla once every week and then, document their community. And I think that's, something that maybe, we're lacking, in coverage. But, just reaching out to other communities around us is something that I'm really interested in doing and hope to do in the future is, kind of what I did with Culture Camp. With the people here, especially when if a family member comes up to me the next day and says, I just love that image of, my daughter in the paper. That's something, that's subject matter that I really like, is just the people of Ketchikan, how families interact with one another. The culture of that, the sociology of that, that's just something I've always been a magnet to. That's kind of like what I look like when I'm doing, is I'm just reflecting who they are and what they are at the time of when I do take the photo.
So I'm going to put you on the spot again, Taylor. Well, it's kind of tough to pick out maybe your favorite of your own work, but are there any images that Dustin or Hall or even previous photojournalists or those who've submitted photos to the paper in past years, are there any standouts for you that you just thought, wow?
That I thought, wow?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I flip through Hall's book, every couple months and just find a new photo that I absolutely love. The one he took of it's the two loggers leaning up against the stump, sitting on the ground. They've got like a can of Orange Crush and they're just taking a sip.
Right.
I love that photo. He's got one of a kid with a fishing pole walking along like a pipe or something, or some kind of
Right.
Yeah. Water tunnel. I don't know. That's what a pipe is, I guess. So those are some of my favorites of Hall's, from his book at least. And Dustin's has taken some great shots too. His most recent one that he sent me that really wowed me was during the flood y'all had earlier in the year. That shot of the policeman looking into the window with the cat in the window. That's a fantastic photo.
And that one got some recognition from a national stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
fantastic.
Very well deserved recognition too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was surprised on that. That was interesting. That I was worried about that because there's an ethics thing with journalism that you never shoot through anyone's window into their home. But since there was a police officer there shining his light through and searching through it, it became part of the story. So the ethics kind of, was acceptable on that. And so when I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, are they going to call that part out and question it? But no, I was really surprised to see that image was even, chosen. But, we're up here in Alaska and everything is so interesting. And to begin with, when you see anything with the Alaskan name come out, it always automatically, it probably, spikes interest in other people. But then to see a cat, making that reaction to a police officer shining his flashlight through a window, I'm sure everyone was just like, wow. But yeah, I'm still always surprised to see anyone recognize my images of being, out of the ordinary or different. But that's what I try to do. Yeah. You have several of Paul's photos that you have on your exhibits I just go wow because he has such a favorable style, I guess, stance of photography that I love and that I kind of try to replicate through my whole life. And so all of his pictures, when he takes them, he's like, I always look at him and he sends me a lot of things and I'm like, oh wow, he did a way better job and found the correct stance of what I would have really tried to get, but I probably would have come up short on it. But I really enjoy his there's a picture that you have of a elderly man on a cane, and it's just a straightforward kind of what you'd call topography, not looking down but straightforward shooting. And that is an image that those are my everyday images that I really look for, is to see someone in their environment walking through it, and kind of that shows who that person is, really kind of gives their character. This is a photo kind of, what I'm talking about is what I really love about Hall's stance. And because I kind of, we have, this is something in common that we have, is just that really straight on stance where you can see the vertical lines are, vertical up and down, not, I guess not, there's no foreshortening or anything or any kind of angles, I guess the lens isn't dipped to the side. And Taylor's images, I always look at the festivals, whenever I'm right about to shoot one, like Blueberry Festival. And Taylor is the person I would always look at his photos because he has more of a, I guess he gets up, a little closer than myself to his subjects, which is, that's the thing that you have to really do in journalism is, are you going to shoot always from far away, or are you going to get right close and personal with your subject and not be afraid to do that? And Taylor definitely strides on that and gets right up to his subjects. And I think Blueberry Festival is his perfect example of that, when he's, even the slug races, is he gets right in there and shoots right into those kids' faces, and the pie eating stuff, the reactions that he has. He is a really strong reaction photographer, and that even goes down into sports. All of his sports images have some kind of odd reaction, whether it's happy or emotional or just distress in a way. He's definitely the guy that captures that.
But what I would like to know too, Taylor answered a little bit about some of the photos that you've taken, that Dustin's taken, that he really enjoys. Are there photos that you'd like to point out of their work, or of past photographers you'd really like us to draw attention to?
I can't remember specific photos, but I do remember the cat, the one that Taylor got of the flood. I mean, Dustin got of the flood recently. That is an exceptional shot. And it's pretty neat that AP picked it up for one of their photos of the week that they sent to all their members nationally too. But that's a great shot. They've both done really good photos. And I especially like Taylor's sports photography, because he has kind of he approaches it differently than I do. And I think same with Dustin, approaches it a lot different. And I've learned from looking at their compositions, which were totally different than what I was taught. I was taught that tight is right. I have friends that studied with a guy named Chuck Scott, and he taught photography at University of Ohio in Athens. And he's very well known in the newspaper business, making great photographers that come out of his program. And he's the guy that redesigned the Anchorage Daily News in the 1980s, I think, when the McClatchy family took it over and made it a photographer's paper. But I met a couple of his students when I first started the Ketchikan Daily News, that they're in their 23, 24, went through his program. And they told me a lot what they got out of him. I so impressed by him that I almost want to take a year off and study with him for a year, take a sabbatical, but I never got around to doing it. But that affected my vision and my sense of composition. And Taylor and Dustin do a lot looser compositions with a lot of their photos. And it's nice to see a change of pace, different visions, what they bring to the plate.
Sometimes too loose on my end. You've helped me with my crops a lot in my time there.
Well, yeah, I know. I try not to be critical, but more constructive. I like shots that kind of zoom in, as I was taught. And I used to get criticized for my sports photos that I sent over the AP wire from the Fairbanks Anchorage photographers, and say, what are you trying to do to show the whole court and all the players? We want to have the action shot of the two players involved in the shot. So that really affected me. And that was early enough on that I tried to shoot like everybody else, at least in basketball and sports, get the tight shot. But Taylor is really good at getting the wider shot that shows maybe the players' action in the background. And Dustin does the same thing. Framing the shot with something in the foreground, and having leading you into what's really going on in the photo and stuff.
How do you view your own work then, as it contributes to a historic record for us of what the community in Ketchikan is?
Yeah, that's really good question. That's how I look at it, is like I'm your personal scribe for the community, and I really look at my images being photographed for history, and that is a museum, which they'll, as you've seen with the rest of the photographers, all their images end up into the museum. That the Ketchikan Daily News one, Hall's images are in the museum now, and I hope that his whole archives end up with you at some point. Just like I think Sari donated all his archives to you, and that's what I look at as my own work, is I'm photographing for the museum in a way as well. Even though it's it's not there yet, but I'm hoping my images all end up with you at some point, and it'll be a part of history and a permanent part of history. Because you think of like posting on Facebook and social media, those are so in a way almost temporary, because what happens if Facebook disappears? But nothing's going to happen to a museum. It's going to be there for for all history, and that's and they're going to make a point of making it that way.
We certainly hope to include your body of work within the museum, and we really do think it's important to make certain that we're cataloging those for future generations, so that an exhibit 50 years or 100 years down the line, when they're doing an exhibit about, like you were saying, COVID-19, how did it affect southern Southeast Alaska, we can look to your images to help tell some of that story where we might not have artifacts or other things that we need.
Yes.
So thank you in advance from our future selves, here at the Ketchikan museums, whatever that ends up looking like in 100 years' time.
You can go, Hall.
Well, yeah, I guess I look at my work as a historical documentation of life and times of Ketchikan for a 35-year period or whatever. I think as far as historical perspective, because we're all newspaper photographers, we're capturing the community. I think that it's important that what we've all done, capturing the town at different periods of history.
With Hall's book too, there's transition that Ketchikan is going through, and Hall captured that whole, the height of the pulp mill as well as the transition of it disappearing. What do we have right now is right now we have the pandemic, and we have this transition of tourism that just disappeared, and how everyone's dealing with that. That's kind of what I'm here doing, what Hall did back then, as the pulp mill. I'm here with the pandemic.
Looking back in that captured in time and looking at some of those historic photos that really tell stories. And I know you've had a run of the collection as far as seeing some of what our holdings are. Do you want to expand a little bit about that as far as photographers in Ketchikan?
Well, I can't remember specific photos, but the people that I like are the Hunts. I really like Harriet Hunt, and I think that she's a real pioneer with her photography, and she used, I think, glass plates at the time. Okay, Harriet Hunt.
Yeah, we've got her right there.
And I think that family members were also, I don't know if it was her father or her sister, also took photos, but early documentations of people, in places like that store. I really love the Hunt store, stuff like that. I think it's pretty important stuff.
Yeah, that shop photo is great.
Yeah. And Con Gable or Gable, he's pretty cool too. He,
I really like the. There's a shot by Alfred Malott.
Oh, Malott, yeah.
Of the cat on a foggy day on Creek Street that is just so eerie and just so perfectly Creek Street that I had to screenshot that page so I could save it for this.
It was almost 100 years ago that I think it was like the 30s that image is from. And I took a photo, I always document the street or Creek Street cats as well as pigeons. So there's like a photo I have of one of the Creek Street cats that is very similar to that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, even the framing and the stance that he used was similar. It's like almost like a synchronization 100 years later from me to that photographer.
That is a wonderful photo.
Yeah, so
absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, and I've seen, I think you had a wonderful photo too, Taylor, of some cats in Ketchikan. We were looking back through some of the past Ketchikan Daily News photos that you all have done. It seems like everyone's taken a picture of like a cat on Creek Street.
Yeah, there's a lot of cats walking around. For a place with so many eagles, I'm surprised there's so many cats.
Is that a seagull on a rail also in that shot?
Oh yeah,
it looks like it. Yeah.
It does, doesn't it? Well, that's very archetypal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all concept. Oh, we look at now. David Nickel, he did some great stuff too.
Yeah, and then the classic tide flats photo there at the bottom.
Yeah, with the baseball and the ice on the fishing boat.
Yeah, what I would have done to photograph baseball in the right there. That would be so cool.
I mean, when you think about that shot, you can even see the ball, and they did not have fancy cameras back then. They weren't really fast for action. but that's just a great action shot.
Yeah. And it's raining because everyone's got umbrellas, so it's dark.
Yeah.
It's impressive they were able to freeze the action at all.
And it has a sense of place too. I love that backdrop in that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the location is something that we probably will never see ever again. So it's great that this is history where you can look back and see that this actually happened, because I don't think we'll ever have a baseball game like that again, because it just doesn't, the tide doesn't bring out as much, I guess, in the area that it is. It's already covered with a road, so we can't have a baseball game in there anymore.
You know you're in Ketchikan whenever you're looking at that photo.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, nowhere else would that photo exist.
True. David Nichols, pretty cool too. He has the ice on the boat.
Yeah, that's a very cool shot.
And the people shots. I love the people shots and stuff like that with the town, people walking down the town. Is very nice.
Yeah, I mean, we very much view, your all's photos in this same kind of lens for us at the museum. We've got so many photos of different parades or the Blueberry Festival or different events and things. And without the photojournalists, without, y'all's folks, taking these photos, we wouldn't have documentation of these events, of these people, of the events here in Ketchikan or the community. So we definitely like looking at your body of work in the context of, the museum and what future generations might be able to look back on and understand a little bit more about.
Yeah, and Alfred Malott did a lot of the native cultural stuff in towns. And that's pretty important too.
But yeah, there's just so many really great photos. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the poker game photo is incredible.
Okay, that's kind of like a Taylor picture where he gets right into there and shoots. This reminds me of a Blueberry Festival, the slug race, actually, just the round table part of it. But the composition too. I mean, you can tell this is, they're definitely were trained in composition, and just the print was great.
1938.
That's like a painting or something. It's so good. It's
yeah,
like a famous. That's just a wonderful shot. Low light, very tough technically to handle, especially with the technology and cameras and lenses back in the day. Film. Very impressive.
That pipe is ridiculous.
The cabin in Saxon, that's pretty rare. Just one fluky shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, waterfront.
That Saner brawling or railing, is that what that says? I had that photo saved too, just because it looks ethereal, like it looks like some kind of ghost boat or something.
Oh, Otto Schaller, right?
Yeah.
Otto Schaller was incredibly prolific. Does the museum have a lot of his work?
Yes, yeah, we do actually. And again, I mean, it just harkens back to that slice of life idea. There's just so many really great photos documenting Ketchikan's past.
I think that he's the most prolific of that group by far. I used to go to Schaller's photo store when I was downtown Front Street for years. It wasn't, Schaller was gone, but the German couple worked at Fred and his wife, and they were real nice. And you could see a lot of old Otto Schaller postcards.
I think everyone has seen, has at least, seen one of those postcards, but they're so prolific as far as the spread of how far they've traveled, in what collections they're in, and, the photos that people have from that, for sure.
Right. One of the Denny's.
Oh, and we come to, Hall's record here. So these are just a few of the photos that we've really spotlighted that are in the permanent exhibit of Ketchikan Is. So that's that kind of new permanent look at these different facets of Ketchikan. And you're definitely in there, Hall.
I see that.
Yeah, I love the parade spectators photo, and the Cadillac in the garage are two of my favorites.
Yeah, I keep driving up 2nd Avenue looking for that garage.
Is it still there?
Well, kind of. It doesn't look the same. What was the year? That was 05 that was taken? Oh, 1986. Yeah.
86. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is one that, so in talking with you just, I guess a couple of days ago, maybe it was yesterday.
That's Ray Troll's daughter.
Yeah.
Serena Troll.
Oh, wow.
I think she
Yes.
was 3 years old, maybe 4. I can find out. And that's Clara Diaz.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, just those slices of life, and identifying people in photos and things like that, where it really comes down to when we have photos that you guys have produced or have run in the paper, it usually comes along with some kind of byline or story, so that we have that identification. And a lot of times, if it's not from a well-known collection where they've noted names and dates and locations, we miss a lot of that information and context. So that's another one of those reasons why using newspaper photos has really been helpful for us in shining that lens on Ketchikan's past.
Right.
Yeah. And it makes you engage with the subject if you have to walk up to them and ask them their name, ask them what they're doing, and you're not it kind of takes away from that voyeuristic view of just sitting far back with a long lens, kind of watching people. If you have to go up and talk to them and introduce yourself, makes it more personal.
We've talked a little bit about how Hall's photos that are in the collection. We also have his camera in the collection, and so we were talking earlier as far as Hall. You started out doing darkroom photography and then switched into that digital. And we actually have your digital camera, the first one that was used by Ketchikan Daily News, in the museum's collection. So did you ever think that would happen when you were first using it back in 2001?
No, I had no idea. But yeah, they wanted to go digital. And I said, well, I can't afford a $4,000 camera. So they bought the camera for me to use. So it's the Daily News' camera, but yeah, I liked it. It was a little tough in sports because you could only go to 1600 ISO with it at basketball anyway, but it was a great camera and a real workhorse. And Dustin also started out using the same digital camera, a Nikon D1H. Now he has, for his age, he has a lot of experience with newspapers, and he's definitely worked at more papers than I have over the years. Like, so he freelanced in Austin, Texas for 4 years for the Austin Statesman.
He worked in Watertown, New York for a little bit.
Yeah, and worked in a couple cities in Wisconsin where he's from too, doing newspaper stuff.
So I started out in darkroom too, just like Hall did. And it's a lot more time consuming, considering their, digital is just instant. And also you can see your images and make sure that you got a good frame. So he's talking about the Nikon D1 camera, which was his first, professional digital camera that the Daily News got him. I think back in like 2000, 2001, sometime around there.
Yes.
That's when it was released. And that's, I have the same one. I bought a D1. I've had 2 of them. And I didn't have mine until about 2003. And it was still kind of a, top of the line, big camera back then, and they're really expensive. They rent from probably around $4,000. But they're only 3 megapixels, but that, that's enough for, to reprint on a newspaper if you use the whole frame. Then, you might start running into it getting a little blurry when you zoom in. But yeah, so the D1 was just such a turning point in digital photography, especially for newspapers. And I was at a school newspaper when I got mine. And I was at a school newspaper for about 5 years, and that was 20 years ago. How I kind of went from, I would have to scan my images in after I went to the processing room, in Mellencamp Hall at UW Milwaukee. And so I would have to go, process, and it would be black and white. And then I would have to run over to the newspaper in a different hall, and we'd have to scan them in, and we were only a weekly paper, so I had a lot of time to do it through the week. But sometimes at deadline, when there was sports in the weekend, we'd have to run over there right afterwards. So I know what Hall went through, and exactly when that D1 came out, that was my first digital camera. It was just so much different, and I liked even then I got to shoot with color and do that. And so yeah, going from black and white to color in newspaper, I guess makes everything a little more richer and I don't know, somewhat more pleasant to look at.
Yeah, he's weirdly got more experience than both you and I, Hall.
He really does, because when you learn, that's how you become really good. Now, Bob Hallinan, who really should be in the collection, because he worked a year between Tom Butchko from Marquette, Michigan, also like Bob, and myself. And he eventually became a photographer of the year when he was with the Anchorage Daily News for the Northwest region of newspapers. And he's done great work, but he did have a year here, and he photographed Nathan Jackson and the totem carvers, and you know, some of that, he should be represented in the collection somehow, some way, with a few images.
Yeah, no, it's good to know whenever we have those gaps in the collection, whether it's subject matter or, you know, people's bodies of work or just knowing more about them, we definitely try and, you know, fill those in. So without talking to you, I wouldn't know to do that. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I want to give out the shout out to Paul Lusari, the Thin.
Yes.
Who used to work, he was one of the early Ketchikan Daily News photographers, I think in the 50s and 60s. And I think he did larger format. It might have been 2 1/4 before 35, but he worked for the paper and then eventually worked for the pulp mill. A single guy, been around for a long time, but I got to know Paul Lou and Richard Van Cleef, who used to be the curator of the photo department, was doing interviews with Paul Lou in his collection before Paul Lou died and Richard departed. But yeah, but we have done a show at the museum on Paulo's work, I believe a few years ago too. But he was a great guy, and he was a connection between me and Doug Charles, who worked at the paper. Who I told you did the large format 8x10 photos, and then he around town. Then he switched to 4x5 and did 4x5 photos around town. I know you have some of that stuff in the collection, and I actually have some good photos of Doug, you know, on site with his 8x10 photographing town, like inside McKay Marineways, which they tore off the top many years ago. It was a great boat works with 2 cathedral-like openings for the old boats that had the long towers and stuff.
If you can just look through the exhibit that you have on, you know, your virtual exhibits, and the stuff that you have for Surrey, there's some of his black and whites are incredible prints, first of all, but then he was kind of like a photographer that was really, you know, working differently than other photographers I think that came through. He was, you know, in the time when the equipment could stop motion, and I think, you know, before, like at the turn of the century, before that, they probably had a problem with stop motion, so a lot of things became portraits instead. But with his work and also the Haldane, I think he did a really good job with working with that old equipment. I mean, he was probably working with giant, you know, lenses and also tripods and stuff, but he was still able to get stop motion of people in fishing vessels, you know, dragging in their catch. So those kind of images really did stick out. And also Holden's images of the Alaska Native culture, just that beautiful light that he would use. You could really tell he was a trained photographer when he came up here. Just those images like are really, I mean, they just stand out with the you know, the difference between the contrast between light and darks that he would use, but the subject matter too. He was capturing, you know, in a transition of what they were going through, being, you know, assimilated into you know, colonial culture back then. It's, I mean, those really did stand out. His work did. Those Holden's work really stood out to me.
Yeah, no, there are so many really great photos in the collection, especially Paul Asari. I mean, he's got the one of the donkey being forced down the stairs after the prank. There's just like a series of, I think, 3 or 4 photos from him, you know, chronicling the plight of this donkey that was led up the stairs and, you know, had to come back down. I mean, just little, very much like a Ketchikan story, which is what I appreciate so much about y'all's work too, is it very much focuses in on community.
Well, I heard that the parties were pretty wild in the 1950s with the social crowd in Ketchikan too.
Oh, I'm sure.
And that's when he did a lot of that great stuff, I know.
With Paulo's work, you know, his black and white prints are extremely technical. And I really, when I look at Hall's black and white prints, they are very competitive with each other, just with their technical knowledge of how to make a black and white print. I relate to kind of like Ansel Adams. He was a landscape photographer, but he was excellent at making black and white prints. And I know Hall really, looks up to Ansel Adams' head and studied him as well. And I think he's done some of his workshops in his early career, but that really reflects of that as well in his work.
We'll make certain to, link your projects and things you're into. Can you guys speak to that? If there are people who want to learn more about your photo work, or where would you like us to send them to learn more about you guys as photographers? Are there any projects you're currently working on that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I'm working on a lot of projects, but none of it's posted. I started doing Facebook again at the beginning of December because a friend said, yeah, you really need to get back in the Facebook because it's a great way to promote your work. So since December, I've been trying to post a lot of my stuff, and a lot of it's old stuff, like a Deer Mountain. I had a post on Deer Mountain about 4 or 5 shots from an airplane I took a few years ago, and that really got a lot of likes. But I don't, on my website is pretty antiquated. There's nothing really new. And I'm scanning a lot of images so I can eventually put my photo stories. I have quite a few series of photos on certain subjects, and nobody's ever seen any of this stuff. And I'm trying to get to that point where I can have like the 10 best of each series on there. Like I have a Cadillac series that I started long before that Cadillac. And I just, as soon as I saw that photo that you posted, I thought, well, that kind of goes with my Cadillac series, doesn't it?
Well, you've given me something exciting to look forward to then, is to continue to see what photos you're posting on Facebook.
Yeah, I just haven't posted a lot of stuff, and I have a lot of stuff that I really want to post that I've been working on for years. And like I have a ragdoll series, a Raggedy Ann, and I've been photographing Raggedy Ann. I found her in 1979 at an abandoned farmhouse in Eugene, Oregon. And I've taken her to Paris. I've taken her to Washington, D.C. She's been to Mexico. And I've always wanted to do a children's book with her. I can show you her if you, well, she's right behind me. But anyway, so that's been a series I've been working on for years. And it's a photo series. There are a few Raggedy Ann shots. If you go to my Facebook site, you'll see me holding the Raggedy Ann doll.
I'm going to check that out. That sounds fantastic. Now, Taylor, we'll definitely, I know we talked about your Aurora Borealis work and some of your personal photos and things. So that is fantastic. We'll, of course, eagerly follow your career down in Oregon and invite you back anytime you're, popping into town or taking photos on the fly. So for sure. Yeah. Are there any parting words you guys have for us as far as what it's meant to take photos in Ketchikan for the paper?
I mean, it's a huge honor to be able to document, a town as close knit as Ketchikan. That's another thing that I wasn't really used to coming from, Baton Rouge is like, you got like 250,000 people in it, so you don't really know anyone outside of the people you go to school with. But Ketchikan was incredibly welcoming to me, and my girlfriend is from Ketchikan, so I'm in Ketchikan often, seeing her family and stuff. So it's been it was a huge privilege to document the comings and goings of that town.
And I just want to say kudos to Taylor. I couldn't have been a more perfect person to take my spot at the Ketchikan Daily News, and it's hard to cover for someone that's been there for 30 years, and he did an excellent job, and his Aurora stuff is exquisite, I have to admit. But Taylor did a wonderful job, understood the community, got into it, has a local girlfriend, and did great. And I feel the same way. It's really an honor that you don't realize at first, be able to document a small town and really get into it, get to know the people and the life and times and stuff. But as Taylor and Dustin both know, it is really a grind when you're working often 6 days a week. It's nonstop, but it's got its rewards. you know, in the end also. So yeah, it was very special for me.
Right. Well, I mean, that pretty much rounds us out here. Is there anything that you've really taken away from actively, you know, again, we talked, you know, Hall and Taylor aren't here actively more as like as in your position as a staff photographer. But is there anything else you'd like to add to what it's been like taking photos here in Ketchikan, or how you view your role as a photojournalist?
Yeah, well, this experience with the people has been different than anywhere I've ever been in my life, and it should be, considering where we are and just, you know, what different, how we deal with the world differently every day up here. And that's probably my favorite part, and that was what keeps me here too, is just how different it is. And if you know, if I wasn't photographing this, I don't think I would, you know, I don't think I would be happy. So it makes me happy being up here every day. On, you know, some days are really challenging with the rain and the weather, and, you know, that's never going to change. But so I just have to kind of, you know, I guess, you know, kind of be, you know, like a chameleon and change into my environment. But yeah, so, you know, that it's challenging every day, but, you know, it wouldn't be fun if it wasn't, I don't think. And but yeah, that's
Well, thank you guys all for joining us today for this museum midday. And we look forward to seeing many, many more photos from all of you, whether it's on personal projects or documenting Ketchikan. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll have to see what your next post is, or your next photo. We'll look forward to it.
No problem. Thanks again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.